G'day, welcome to the Off-Chain Podcast. Don here with you, and my co-host today is a technology innovator. Simon Greenman is a partner at AI management and governance consultancy Best Practice AI, and he sits on the World Economic Forum's Global AI Council. Back in the day, he co-founded the early internet brand and AI company MapQuest.com. He is a technology innovator. Simon holds a BA in computing and artificial intelligence from Sussex University and an MBA from Harvard Business School. He also works with HBSA's Angel Investor Network in the UK, mentoring early stage startups. So we're really excited to have Simon on the show. Let's dive into the conversation. Simon Greenman, thank you so much for joining us today. Where in the world are we speaking to you from today?
Yeah, well, pleasure to be here. Thank you for hosting me. I am in London today, a bit grey day, but pleasure to be here.
Oh, very good. It's like 40 degrees centigrade where I am at the moment. So if you see beads of sweat, you'll know what's going on. Oh boy, sunny Australia. Simon, you are one of the, while everybody else is just catching up on AI and just starting to think about it, and it's all over the news and every podcast is talking about it, you have been thinking about AI, artificial intelligence, for actually quite a while. How do you come to be an expert in artificial intelligence? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, quite a while is the best way of putting it. Somehow I ended up doing a degree. I won't quite say how many years ago, but let's say it's more than 25, maybe about 30. I did a degree in AI at Sussex University, and it was back when the time when actually nobody knew what AI was. And when people said AI, is that artificial insemination? And obviously not.
Yeah.
But yes, I have been involved for quite some time. My career has really been about digital innovation, data, algorithms, and AI.
Yeah, right. So in terms of you've been thinking about AI for 25 years, what did AI mean or look like 2.5 decades ago? And kind of how has that progressed over the couple of decades?
Yeah, I mean, it's strangely, in some ways, it's actually very similar, but very different. And what's changed is exponential. Is that the amount of data that we have, the amount of computer power that we have, the amount of software we have to do AI has really changed exponentially. So back in the day, I mean, I did remember writing my first machine learning deep neural network, but the computational power was just so little, you couldn't really do anything. But the law of exponential is such that the computer power has increased so much that if cars were increasing at the same power as computational chips have increased, then cars would be driving billions of miles per hour, if you can imagine that. The law of exponential, it's just big today. So when you start sucking up all the data, all the words on the internet, all the pictures on the internet, and you put together these supercomputers, suddenly you're starting to do really interesting things with AI. So obviously over the past 2 or 3 months, we've been talking about generative AI, chat GPT. We've heard these buzzwords like large language models, foundational models, that sort of thing. But what's happening is suddenly we're able to do these incredible things in AI that we weren't able to do those 25 years ago. But the other side of AI is it's always been a lot of hype. I mean, it was really late 50s, early 60s where AI came along. And some of the founding fathers of AI were people like Marvin Minsky and others. But there's always been this expectation that AI will replicate human behavior. And I think it was Minsky in the early 60s who said, within our generation, all problems with AI would be solved. And that was 1960. But the reality is they weren't solved. And every time AI comes along, there's an expectation that problems will be solved, all problems of human intelligence will be solved. So at one level, we've got to be careful about getting ahead of ourselves in terms of the hype. But at another level, something different is really going on now, and that relates back to sort of the exponential power and what we can do with these machines now.
So the exponential power, and not just of what we have right now, but even like looking into the future and even in the near future, that's something that excites some people on the one hand and causes great fear for other people on the other hand. Uh, what I'm really keen to hear from you is this, are we now at this current point or epoch in technological advancement or history? Should we be in the fearful mindset, or should we be in the excited mindset? Or don't we
Well,
know?
it's
Do we
Don.
not
It's a
know
great.
yet?
We don't know as the answer, but Don, it's AI. The narrative of AI. It's all about hope. It's going to change the world, and then it's about fear. The robots are going to take over, and we bounce between these two narratives. And the media would love to tell us that we should be fearful, but a lot of the conversation goes back to the concept of AGI, intelligence, and will the machines get more intelligent than us, and will they start taking over the world? And will we as humans become redundant, that sort of thing. So there's a lot of debate around AGI and whether or not machines will become more intelligent. And there's always been a big debate, and it's always been about 20 years away from now that it's going to happen. I mean, I personally am not that worried about it, and maybe because I've seen it over the various generations, and I'm maybe a little jaded at this point, but I'm not that worried. And I tell you why about AGI, because it's a really difficult problem to solve. And
Right.
getting machines to be more intelligent than humans, we're not quite there yet. I don't think we'll actually get to it in my lifetime, but others might disagree with that.
Right. So, I mean, you've actually introduced a bunch of different topics in here. So, when we're talking about AI in general, things like DALI or Copilot or Chat GPT, these kinds of things that have hit
Yeah.
the news to various degrees over the last even couple of months, um, what does that mean in terms of, like you mentioned, a large language model (LLM) in there? How is that different from general intelligence or artificial general intelligence? What does that look like?
Yeah, and this really is what we've had over the past 10 years. I mean, AI really started taking off with another hype wave back in 2012. And what happened in 2012 was there was a contest called ImageNet, which was basically how do we get machines to recognize different objects in pictures? And suddenly in 2012, computer vision got a lot better. It went from, I don't know, 60% accuracy in recognizing objects like cats, dogs, sharks, whatever, lots of different classes of objects, suddenly got much better, so 80, 90%. So really over the past sort of 10 years, we've had something called predictive AI, some call it classification, and it's been really, really good. And so we've seen AI used for predictions in lots of different cases. So predict the best CV or resumes for candidates that will fit in our organization. Predict whether or not, when I'm looking at the manufacturing line, the part is defects for quality control. And so we've been lots and lots of different types of predictions. Um, and it's working generally very well, and it's being poured into the mainstream. We know AI in the mainstream because things like, and I've got to be careful not to say it, but Alexa devices are in our homes.
Yep.
We've got facial recognition predicting whether or not the face it's seeing on our phones is us, that sort of thing. And it's been pretty good. But then suddenly, what's happened over the past 2 or 3 months is there's this thing called generative AI, and there's lots of buzzwords, and there's always lots of buzzwords in AI. But generative AI is all about creating content. Machines are able to create things with words, contents with words, with pictures, with sounds and audio. And what's interesting is we'd always assumed that sort of AI wouldn't really impact upon our human creativity. Human creativity is something uniquely human that wouldn't be automated, wouldn't be jobs that would be taken from us. But then suddenly, what feels like out of the blue, the world woke up and to this generative AI. And then OpenAI, which is a San Francisco based organization, brilliant, brilliant engineering, they released ChatGPT just before Christmas. And it's really a chatbot. And it opened it up to the world so everybody can try it, from myself, from you, from my mother to students. Everybody in the world has access to it for free. And what you do is you type in a question like, why is the weather so bad in London? Or what is the definition of AI? You type in these questions and then it starts spitting out these very, very, very coherent answers. And it has a wow moment. People who type in basically anything, the answer is kind of like, wow. So generative AI is moving us from sort of predictions, classifications, pretty routine stuff, into suddenly it's being creative and answering questions and creating pictures for us like we've never seen before. And that's why everyone in the newspaper, the media, everyone is talking about chat GPT.
Yeah, right. So on the one hand, it is a massive step forward. On the other hand, it's just
Hmm.
the next iteration, um, which we can use now or can do now because of how computational power has increased. In what?
Yeah,
So I mean, obviously, I've used Chat GPT and Dali and a few other things like that a lot actually. And on first
yeah,
glance, and this is the thing that I generally hear, people say, "Oh my goodness, this is going to change everything." And then the next step is, well, hang on, if this is what we can do now, what? And if I look back even just a decade ago at where we were in terms
hmm,
of, like you say, facial recognition and things like that, where are we going to be in another 10 years? And then what does that mean for us? What kind of ethical problems are we going to have? What does it mean for the
yeah,
workforce if this can take on a lot of the intelligence power of like a lower, even higher level things? Like I've heard of coders who are doing 80% less coding for the
yeah.
same results using Copilot and similar kinds of AI tools.
Yeah,
This
it's
this
a
is
great
a this is a
question. I mean,
big big change.
the first question is, will you have a job in 10 years' time? Because generative AI, one of the use cases is great, is voice cloning. So what we can do is take lots of different samples of your voice, and then instead of actually having you on a podcast, what I can do is type in the script in the words, and it will perfectly reproduce your voice. So, and actually, some of the deep fakes that we're doing at the moment, we could perfectly reproduce your face with the words and lips synchronized at the same time. So
Right.
there's lots of different things that can happen
But
with generative AI in the coming years. But
you
I
don't even
think,
really need a script though,
there's
right?
one, yeah, exactly.
You don't
But
need a script.
there's
Can't
lots,
you just plug? Could you just theoretically? Are we at a place where we could build an LLM based
yeah,
on me or you, dump
yep,
everything you've ever created into it, and then again get the generative face um, display and the voice kind of whatever, and
yeah,
have them reply as me or as much as
yeah.
me as you could reasonably expect.
Yeah, you can absolutely expect that. I mean, the large language models would do the words, but the other foundational models can do pictures, sounds, that sort of thing. But you're absolutely right, because what these models do is they basically patterns. And if they see enough examples of your voice, of your face, of your lips moving, that sort of thing, they can replicate it. And that becomes, I mean, when level, it's amazing what it can do. It's kind of scary because to your point about deep fakes, what happens when you're looking at media, be it podcasts or videos, that sort of thing, and you don't know if it's real? Um, you don't know what's truth, what's not truth, what's fact, what's fiction, that sort of thing. And that's some of the ethical problems that's coming out of foundational models is there's a blurring of lines between fact and fiction. And they call it hallucinations, that these models, these large language models, aren't necessarily designed for truth, but they're designed for very coherent conversations. So you can ask it anything, and if it doesn't know the answer, it's going to actually make something up, and it's very, very plausible. So what we as we look to the future, what we're worried about is questions of what's truth, and it's a big societal question because if everyone's going to ChatGPT or their search engines, and we know that Google's going to do something like ChatGPT, they just tried it with their Bard service they launched and they lost $100 billion in market value in one day,
Yeah.
$100 billion, which is unbelievable because some canny observers thought, well, you ask it questions and it comes up with rubbish, and the markets took fright. But to your point, there's big questions around what's truth, and if there isn't blurring of line between fact and fiction, there's big societal questions like, will it undermine democracy, and what does that mean for elections and things like that. But there's other problems with these models around what they really do is they replicate what's been said or heard from humans. And so ChatGPT and Google's models as well, Bard, what they do is they basically scan all of the internet. You think of the billions and billions of pages, 300 billions, if not trillions of words. They suck it all up, ingest it, and then they look for patterns in what's been said before, and they replicate those patterns and spit out output when you ask questions. A simple question like, what are the top things to do in London as a tourist? That question has been answered hundreds, if not thousands, if not tens of thousands of times on the internet. So ChatGPT will have seen that answer before and basically regurgitate it. But what happens when you have toxic content on the internet, misogynistic, racist, violent content? It hoovers that all up and spits it out. Um, so there's a big question mark around how do we make sure that these large language models and the foundational models have are responsible in what they say and do, and don't just replicate and amplify sort of the worst of human really behavior and views, that sort of thing. So there's a lot going on around that question of how do we get facts and how do we stop toxicity.
Well, so for me, as I think about what you just said, I'm thinking
Yeah.
is that might be some of the easier problems to deal with. How do you
Mhm.
how will we kind of reckon with a technology that, like you say, hoovers up everything and delivers as the truth some statement when it is merely a preferred, say, vision of the future or preferred politic, which isn't necessarily good versus evil, but one preference versus another preference, and it's saying this is the way.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really sort of philosophical question, which is what is truth? I mean, not to stray into politics, but obviously in the UK, we showed that the masses chose Brexit. So if you back in 2016, so if you ask a question such as has Brexit been successful? What's the answer to that question? Well, it depends upon your political view. It depends upon how you view economics. How it depends what sort of time frame you're looking at. 1 year, 500 years, that sort of thing. So
Yeah.
it's really hard to answer those sorts of questions, and then it becomes sort of philosophical as to who is the source of truth. So it's not an easy problem to solve. I mean, there are facts like, how many miles around the circumference of the world. And so what you're going to see is big tech, and big tech, which is sort of Google, Microsoft's, Facebook's, Amazon's, Apple in the US, and in China, Alibaba and Baidu, huge technology with huge resources in terms of engineering, money they can put into it. You're going to see these companies, they have to address questions of fact versus fiction. Because if they don't, then their reputation is going to be damaged, and they're going to lose a lot of stock market cap value. So there's a lot going on by these companies to try and work out how do we see whether or not sentences contain fact. How do we have fact databases? How do we get authoritative sources of fact? But there's also a big move in AI, led in a lot of cases by big tech, to make AI more transparent. These large language models, I mean, they're huge. I think ChatGPT has 175 billion parameters. Imagine an Excel spreadsheet with 175 billion cells with
Yeah.
little formulas in it. Huge. So they're massive, massive models, black boxes. And so there's a big push to make these models explainable. Explain how you came to the answer. So if you give an answer about the top 5 things to do in London, then what are the sources of that information? Cite it. And so one of the movements we've pushed a lot at it at the World Economic Forum when we're looking at responsible AI use around the world is AI, if it's going to be used, has to live up to principles of responsible AI. And some of those principles are make it explainable and transparent. How did it come up with those answers? Um, so you'll see big tech and others very much work on the problem of how do we make it explainable, how do we make it transparent, and give users the confidence that what they're looking at is factual, or if it's ambiguous, provide various sources of information that you and I as users can go to research the topic more.
So big tech is going to be doing the kind of self-governance of content moderation. I mean, that's kind of a hot topic, you might say, in recent days, even as recently as the last couple of months, with Twitter files coming out, and you mentioned Brexit before, and now it just comes to mind, like Cambridge Analytica and different kinds of ways and means that people have, or big tech has, either failed to or actively engaged in content moderation that
Yeah.
actually hasn't been helpful.
Yeah. It's a really interesting topic, and it's a global topic as well. Is what is the role of government in terms of sort of regulating technology versus should big tech self-regulate? And obviously, big tech is going to say, it's okay, don't worry, government, we'll look after ourselves. We'll make sure that we're fair and transparent and we solve these issues. And government, especially in Europe, might raise their eyebrow and say, your track record is not so good here. So what you've got in many ways, you've got sort of three continents of regulation going on. Europe is much more inclined to sort of put citizens first and give control to its citizens, consumers, users, and regulate. US, with its sort of federal structure, tends to leave things less regulated. Instead of being central government, they push it down to the individual states. And then you have China, with its population of 1.4 billion, huge population, is kind of like, no, what we're about is making sure stability of society. So we're going to regulate you pretty heavily. And China's actually leading in the way of regulating deep fakes, because if deep fakes, deep fake video, and you might have seen the deep fake video of Tom Cruise,
Yeah.
um, they're saying that if we have a lot of deep fakes, it will destabilize national security, economy, that sort of thing. So we're going to regulate it. So you'll see a lot, surprisingly, a lot of the regulation come out of China first, I think even ahead of Europe. Um, but big tech, I mean, they know, especially a company like Microsoft, they were hit by the Europeans about 30, 40 years ago for monopolistic predatory behavior,
Hmm.
and they got whacking great fines. So big tech is not immune to, and they're not lost on the argument you've got to work with governments. Though, Facebook obviously pushed the boundaries. With some of their algorithms, and there was concern over misinformation, and there's a lot of concerns that perhaps there was disinformation by, I hate to say the Russians in the American elections back in recent American regulations. So Facebook took them a while to wake up to that sort of thing and how their platform could be used for the spread of disinformation, and they know they've got to start addressing it. And they've also, I think they've added, if the number's right, about 20 or 30,000 actually humans looking for disinformation and other toxic content. So they're waking up to this, maybe a bit too slowly, but they know if they don't do a good job here, regulators will come down very hard on them.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, you mentioned before what I think is, or from all of the options that I've heard, surely sounds like the best option, which is
Yeah,
actually being more transparent with those algorithms. How did
yeah,
we end up with this, or coming to this conclusion? Or especially if like you Google something at the moment, it gives you a list of 100,000 websites ranked
yes,
by their algorithm. Whereas you
yeah,
go to Chat GPT, it gives you the answer, not necessarily saying this is the
yeah,
definitive truth, but it does present it, presents it that way, or at least that's how people are going to AI, or that's what they're going to AI for at this stage. So yeah, man, I
yeah,
think that the more transparent those companies are going to be, big tech, if we can put them in a bucket like that, with
yeah,
this is the sources, here's how we arrived at this, this is why we
yeah,
arrived like this for you personally. I think that's going to help a lot in actually deciding how am I going to interact with this information.
yeah. Yeah, I think it's absolutely right. I mean, there's got to be transparency, and what's been happening, and you see it with lots of organizations around the world, from the World Economic Forum, there's a lot of academic organizations, the OECD, um, is lots of different groups have been talking about the question of how do we make sure AI is used responsibly around the world for good, and how do we sort of put guardrails around the more negative things. So a lot of these organizations, and I think that we counted up about 200, have come up with similar principles for the deployment of AI. And generally the principles are, if we're going to use AI within organizations, business, and society, the technology needs to be explainable and transparent. Basically, how do the algorithms work? They've got to be fair and not biased. And there have been lots of cases in things like facial or gender recognition algorithms, where the algorithms, for example, are much better at recognizing the gender of white middle-aged males versus
Yes.
middle-aged ethnic females. So, we've got to get transparent, we've got to be fair, biased. AI needs to be accountable, i.e., in organizations, there needs to be humans behind it. It needs to be safe and alike. So we've been looking at how do we make sure these principles are basically agreed and started to put into practice. And companies actually like Microsoft, because they recognize they've got to get ahead on the responsible AI front to build trust with their users, are actually doing a good job in these values. Another good company doing this, and I like a lot, is Salesforce, really on the forefront of sort of responsible AI and building trust amongst their users and things. So that's been the big push, is to make sure if we're using these technologies, then they are used responsibly. And back to your earlier point, it's not only AI that's coming along. I mean, there's a lot of talk about quantum computing and what does that mean and how do we use that responsibly. There's a lot of other technologies like precision medicines coming along, 3D manufacturing, autonomous vehicles, blockchain. How do we sort of confluence of what's commonly called fourth generation technology? How do we make sure that they're all used for good and not
Mm.
for bad? And some of the
I'm
bad stuff is, yeah, carry on. Sorry.
no, go for it. Go for it. I don't want
Yeah,
to
yeah. I mean, some of the
stop
bad
that.
stuff is AI technology can always be used for good. It can always be used for bad. But for AI, what do we do with things like facial recognition? Because facial recognition has almost become a commodity. You can pretty much, an 18-year-old kid who knows Python programming could download facial recognition libraries and get a facial recognition program up and running in an hour or two. I mean, there's such powerful AI that, to your point earlier, you couldn't have done that 30 years ago because the computational power. But AI, facial recognition, ubiquitous. So if it's ubiquitous, we have to ask the question, where should we be able to, as a society, use facial recognition and where not? I mean, when I come through Heathrow Airport or I go to the States, facial recognition, it recognizes me within 5, 10 seconds and I go through. It's fantastic.
Hmm.
But imagine if you walked into the local shopping mall and there was a facial recognition camera and it says, that's Don. And I know that Don likes to buy these clothes and he likes these types of electronic products. It might be a question of sort of infringement on your privacy, that sort of thing. So there's a lot of privacy concerns. And what about if you're outdoors at a concert or outdoors? Should society be allowed to actually monitor you? There is human rights that basically have a right to privacy. So those are the types of questions. And then you get into things like autonomous weapons, drones that have facial recognition technology, and they were flying around, and they can actually be programmed with someone's face, and they could drop a bomb on them, that sort of thing. That sounds like it might be permissible in the context of wars, but what happens if that technology gets into the hands of terrorists and it could be used in a city like New York, that sort of thing? So there's some really, really important questions and guardrails around how this technology is used and how it's distributed and how it's controlled.
Man, so okay, you've just opened up about 20 more different topics to talk about. When it comes to, let's go for, oh boy,
Yeah,
who gets to decide these things? You mentioned before, in China has a different approach to America, which has a different approach to Europe, which has a different approach to
yeah,
Australia, where I'm from. When it comes to privacy, there
yeah,
are facial recognition cameras. If I go into the city where I live, I know for sure
yeah,
there are facial recognition cameras because it was very controversial when they were installed.
yeah,
And you go to China, I know for sure there are facial recognition cameras in major cities in China. So who,
yeah.
when we're talking about at the internet layer of humanity, if you
Mm.
like, where we're not bound by geography, who gets to decide these things?
Yeah, It's a great question. I mean, at the end of the day, it comes down to government and society. I mean, in a democracy, in theory, we can vote for the governments we want and the values they want. I mean, to your point, facial recognition cameras in London is probably got more CCTV facial recognition cameras than any than per capita than any other city in the world. That sort of thing. So it comes down to one, the government and the values and whether or not we can influence it as citizens. At other levels, there is sort of international cooperation going on. I mean, the European Union obviously is very focused on common values. So they're coming up. They just proposed last year or the year before the EU AI Act, which defines what can European countries within the union do with AI and not. And they have a risk-based approach, which is basically how risky in terms of the impact on its citizens is AI. So they are going to have a pretty strong view on facial recognition that it only be used within certain context of security and national security and can't be used for wider general use. They have definition of AI risk will include things like if you're using AI to help on recruitment. So if you imagine a company gets thousands upon thousands of CVs and resumes, at the moment it can take quite a long time for humans and human resources to go through that. But what if your computer could scan all of those CVs and resumes and say, that candidate looks good for us, that candidate's a no. That's considered a high risk because it has such a material impact upon you and I. And what the EU is saying is if you are using AI for high risk, such as recruitment, then you've got to make your technology explainable. You've got to have a human over the loop. And as a human, you've actually got to be able to say, I don't want to be assessed by a computer. I want to have the option of being opt out. So I think what I'm saying is, yeah, the different sort of government regimes will have different values, and they will put in place regulation. But broadly, you do see a convergence in the responsible AI principles. So China leading on actually deep use of deep fakes or not deep fakes. They're actually doing very well on explainability and transparency. But the question you might have around China is what data can government see? So can it hoover up all the data from private companies like all the search engines and things? And if you believe the rumors, the answer is yes. Whereas it will be harder in Europe for, unless it's under sort of security laws, for European companies to hoover up private data. But this is an ongoing debate, and broadly, there is sort of harmonization in what we believe are the right principles to govern the use of responsible AI globally.
So do you think that there's going to be some sort of, like there has been in a sense with, say, nuclear weapons a generation ago, where there's
Yeah.
been non-proliferation, but also some sort of, whether it's because of mutually assured destruction or because of just
Uh,
people not wanting to be the nation that's dropping bombs places. There's
yeah.
a sense of this is too great for us. We are going to
Yeah.
not go there. Uh, what's it going to take? Like, is there
Yeah.
a possibility, even in the best optimistic future, that every not just nation but company and 18-year-old genius like coming out of school who knows how to program and access APIs is not going to
Yeah.
be able to use this technology in some of the ways you've just described? How can we possibly safeguard against even just this is before we even talk about AGI? This is just with the current capabilities, or at least the ones we could see on the current horizon.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. There will be governments will say you can do this and you can't do this, and we will regulate it. You can use it in these circumstances, and not in these circumstances. So things like killer drones, governments are going to have to ban those. Where it's using facial recognition technology or drones, it will just be banned. And you can see that that will happen on a fairly global basis. Um, but it's interesting. We've got to be slightly careful about sort of nuclear war and mutually assured destruction. But there is, and the term arms race, but there is something of an arms race going on in AI, and it's really between China and the US. I mean, the impact of AI on society and our productivity, on the advancement of our societies, the advancement of our economies, is going to be huge. There's no doubt about it. AI is just going to be woven into everything. And you asked earlier about, what are the great things we can see in AI? And AI is starting to tackle issues of healthcare, solving cancer, biotech, and things like that. AI will have massive impacts for good on the world. But what you're seeing going on between the US and China is very much a arms race for who's going to be the leader in AI. So, for example, Biden recently banned the export of NVIDIA state-of-the-art chips, graphical processing units, which are really good at doing AI
Hmm.
and doing all the AI computations because of uh, they don't want the Chinese to have those advanced chips to have as advanced AI capabilities. So you can see the two sort of mega countries duking it out for AI supremacy at this point. And then that's why you get into potentially geopolitical tensions. There's a big question mark around the China and Taiwan. Will China invade Taiwan? And this becomes a really, really important point because Taiwan is a leader in chip production. It has the most advanced semiconductor chip manufacturing capabilities in the world.
Yeah.
So if there was an invasion, it becomes a really sensitive issue here. And what would US do to respond? So there's some real, I think that at the end of the day, there's some real tensions between the US and China that are only going to rise around Taiwan, chips, and leadership in AI. And there's this concept of the two countries are really decoupling. And you're getting two technology infrastructures. There's sort of the US big tech spreading around the world, and then there would be Chinese big tech, Alibaba, Tencent, Baidu, and their huge big technology companies, and their influence around the world. And so we'll see a sort of decoupling and two almost technology AI infrastructures spreading around the world over the next 10, 20, 30 years. And hopefully there isn't a war over Taiwan, but it can't be ruled out.
Right. So thinking
So it's
through,
sobering.
no, I mean, absolutely. I mean, even before AI was really in the news, that was already one of the kind of big geopolitical risks in the world, at least.
Yeah,
Um,
no,
if it's going to be primarily, as you see it, China v, or let's not say v, let's say in parallel, China and the US steaming ahead. Plus, maybe do we add a third category of uh, big tech or individual companies or corporations or maybe startups or something like that who
yeah,
is also going to be joining this race, perhaps not so much for geopolitical dominance, but certainly to become the, if not the, the ubiquitous AI solution, at least the dominant AI solution. Um,
yeah,
how
yeah.
how should we be thinking about this? Like in terms of what you're doing um, with the Global AI Council, how are you thinking about these kinds of things with regard
Hmm.
to the AI arms race, if you like, and where
Yeah.
does AGI play in the
Hmm.
considerations, and how far away are we really from
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, what's happened over the past 5 or 10 years, and with the World Economic Forum and other organizations like the OECD, let's get these principles in place. What are the right principles to ensure we have the right guardrails around the rollout of AI technologies and others? So we've broadly, I think, on a global basis, we define what the principles are. We've started to put in policy, and now you're starting to see these principles be turned into practice. So in Europe, they've got the EU AI Act coming up from government regulators. EU's been ahead on privacy acts such as GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, and things like that. And
Yep.
GDPR in Europe already says that if you're using AI that has an impact on humans, then you've got to explain how it works. So regulation's happening. Big tech is getting more aware of it. Consumers are getting more aware of it. And actually, the interesting twist when we talk to board members at big tech companies and actually most companies is it is easy to lose trust if your technology is seen to invade privacy. And you referred earlier to Facebook and Cambridge Analytica and the scandals there. Is building trust through how you use technology is going to be a must for pretty much any company. Every company is becoming a digital company. So if consumers, users, businesses don't trust you, and how you use that technology, then you've got a problem. So boards are becoming very aware that they need to build trust, and that comes through things like technology principles. And as we said, Microsoft, Salesforce, others are doing it. In Germany, actually, in Germany is a country that's its citizens are very sensitive to privacy. Companies like Deutsche Telekom, their telecoms provider, mobile provider, it's very much a board issue is how do we make sure that we build trust with all of our customers, that sort of thing. So there's a big push for companies boards to actually think hard about this digital trust issue, and that's spreading throughout the world. But back to your point about AGI, and I mean it's a perennial debate. When's AGI going to happen? And I think it's always going to be a generation away, or certainly not in my generation. Others believe it's going to happen earlier, but what the debate is in things like large language models, these huge models that's hoovered up all the content, billions of parameters, how smart are they? They're huge and they're sort of football fields worth of supercomputers and
Yeah.
oceans full of data, but how smart are they? They're not very, is the answer. They first of all, they make stuff up, they hallucinate and lie.
Yeah.
There's very little common sense to these models. They miss things like mental maps. I mean, what makes us human is we have mental models, or what some people, psychologists, call theory of mind. Is I kind of understand you as a human. I kind of know what you're here for, what we're here for. When we interact with people, we have relationships. We have theories of mind as the other, and that allows for the
Hmm.
basis of interaction. It allows us to understand, have empathy, that sort of thing. These computers don't have that. They don't really build models of the world. So even simple things like, if I've got my phone here and I drop it, if I drop it, you will immediately react that that's not a good thing. You
Yeah.
know that this phone dropping is going to break. The computers don't really have models of the world of causation and things. What they have is incredible pattern recognition that's much better than you and I as pattern recognition. It's much bigger,
Yeah.
but they don't have the mental models. So there's a belief that whilst they can solve certain problems, they're not solving the problems of general intelligence. They're not going to be smarter than us. And there is a very famous one of the really academic forefathers of AI, who said, what's happening is we're solving the wrong problems faster with what
Right.
we're doing. So we're solving this problem faster, but we're not solving the problems of AGI at this point. Now, others say, well, actually, there's a concept of emergence that out of all of this billions and billions of parameters in these models emerges some sort of consciousness out of it. And maybe we just keep on adding more and more machines and something emerges. And that consciousness is an emergent phenomenon. When I did a degree in AI many years ago, there was a book by Douglas Hofstadter called Gödel Escher Bach, and it's a sort of seminal book for the industry. But what he pointed to is this concept of emergence. Out of very simple units emerges very complex behavior. And he pointed to ants. And if we think about ants, individually, ants are pretty dumb. They go forward, they go backwards, that sort of thing. But somehow, when you get tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of ants, and they're all working together, this emerges this clever behavior. Ants start building bridges, they start building structures. Um, and so Douglas Hofstadter made the point that maybe with the trillions of neurons in our brain that are interconnected emerges consciousness. And so the argument goes, maybe if we get large language models and foundations of models with trillions upon trillions of parameters and cells, something will merge out of it. And maybe it does. I don't particularly believe it, but others think that consciousness might keep and AGI might keep coming as these models get larger and larger.
Right. So all the computational power plus more data points act like
Yeah,
synapses in the brain, and consciousness comes about.
appears.
That's
Yeah,
the goal.
emerges out of it.
What about even
Emerges out
just
of it. Maybe.
things like an AI that can add to its own code, generative in that kind of sense, self
Yeah,
healing,
yeah.
self
And it's such.
propelling, that kind of
Yeah.
stuff.
Well, actually, yeah. I mean, you actually brought up earlier is one of those amazing things about generative AI is that yes, it can create words and paragraphs, and it can create emergent pictures. But one of the great use cases is amazing. Is it can write code for you,
Yeah.
computer code. And what it is in reality, we've all pretty much wrote the same programs. The same programs have been written hundreds of times, if not thousands, around the world. So when you start hoovering up the internet, you start hoovering up computer code. And what ChatGPT and other language models have done is seen that there's the same code, the same patterns. So now Microsoft has launched a product with OpenAI based on their ChatGPT product called Copilot, and it's a coding assistant. So instead of typing in, let's say you want to build a form where you enter data, instead of doing lots of lots of code that says if enter this and if then this, if then that, 100 lines of code, you just say, build me a form that takes name and address in these fields, and it will spit out the computer code. It's absolutely amazing, and people are talking about productivity increases of 50 plus percent. So it's another example of generative AI, and generative AI can be used in lots of areas like fashion and design, coming up with products. It's coming up for gaming, that sort of thing. But to your point, is there's a scenario in sort of AGI and Terminator movies and that sort of dark dystopian narrative with the robots take over, that it
Uh-huh.
starts writing its own code and it gets smarter and smarter and smarter. And if you optimize the algorithm that and start answering the question of how best to run the world, then the algorithms optimized will see that us as humans perhaps aren't as useful and should end
Or a
up
threat.
terminating us. And if you want to
Yeah.
solve climate change, just kill all the humans. So that will solve the problem in pretty quickly. Uh,
Are,
so
are there
there is
any
doomsday scenarios.
of those dystopian futures, or things in pop culture or movies, cinematic universes that you think are, with regard to AI, the most likely or most kind of near to our own trajectory, or even that you'd hope we would be traveling down?
Yeah, I tend to be an optimist on this stuff. In all honesty, I mean, what I do worry about when we talk about sort of the existential future of society and humanity, less about the sort of the Terminator robots, or the Matrix, where we all become sort of energy cells to power the Matrix. What I do worry about is some of the algorithms that we see coming out of social media, where we only hear in our echo chamber the views and the views that we agree with, and they're amplified. And you could start to argue that some of the social media algorithms destabilize some of the elections in the US. They added to the sort of the January 6th. That worries me. That
Right.
we only live in our bubble change. And what does that do for society and fragmentation of views and harmonization in society? And I think that has given us real pause because it is destabilizing society. The rise of populism around the world, the UK with Brexit, perhaps the US with some of the politics there, Brazil as well. That has a real impact on who we are as a society and things. So that does worry me, and that's why things like having transparency around how the algorithms work, making sure that it's explained and we're seeing how it works and how it impacts. That worries me. But I'm positive about AI at the end of the day. I think it really will start to improve society, democratize access to healthcare. That's a real problem. When you have a symptom chatbot where you can type in your symptoms and it can help diagnose you, or things like going into hospital and getting x-rays and CAT scans and MRI scans. There aren't enough radiologists around the world to look at all the MRI scans. So if we could have computers to help us diagnose diseases from MRI scans. So I think there's
Yes.
some great benefits for democratizing. Education as well is potentially vast area, and China's doing a lot in this area, is making sure we have all lessons that are personalized to us wherever you are around the world. So I think there's some great scenarios to come. Google and its DeepMind research, and DeepMind is a couple of thousand people in London doing research and development in AI. I mean, they launched over the past 2 years AlphaFold, which was able to predict from our DNA strings, which is a sequence of patterns, how that would create 3D proteins and folds, and how folds and proteins in 3D shape will interact. I mean, those are huge, huge breakthroughs that has the potential to lead to new drugs and therapeutics and revolutionize medicine. So I think for me, there's optimism to come, but these are big problems to solve, and unfortunately, they take time to solve as well. So, but I'm an optimist at the end of the day for AI.
Yeah, right. Me too. So, being an optimist and being that
Yeah.
we seem to be just kind of scratching the surface of what's possible,
Hmm.
you are also working in investing and faculty group. We are a venture capital firm as well. What
Yeah.
Where should we be looking? Like everybody seems to be saying, well, we're doing what we were doing before plus AI now, or there's dozens and
Right.
dozens of new AI specific kinds of things. What are you most interested in investing in AI this year, for example?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And you're right. And I do some angel investing here in London, and work with various VCs. Yeah, if I look at generative AI, and actually it's got all the headlines, but it's been around for a few years. And generative AI, especially the textual stuff, the large language models, really came out of Google in 2017 and 18. So it's been around for a while, but there's another gold rush going on in AI, and this is the generative AI gold rush. What you're seeing is, if you think about generative AI, the number of use cases for it was really sort of restricted by our imagination. Um,
Yeah,
but most of the generative AI stuff is co-pilots. It's basically, it's not necessarily replacing our jobs, it's helping our jobs. So all of us are critics. It's much easier to be a critic than creator. But suddenly this AI, generative AI co-pilot can be our assistant to help us with writing. If we've got to respond to an emails, we're writing 30 emails a day, you can type a little bit and it will string a long paragraph together. If we've got to write a marketing brochure, then it can help us write that. Or if we've got to write a sales proposal, it can help us write that. Or if we've got to write a sales proposal for a particular industry, it can help us write that. So what's happening is all of these generative AI tools are being customized by industry, by specific task and activity. So you're seeing hundreds, if not thousands, of sort of use cases by very specific tasks in industries and things. So I was looking at a company the other day in London called AutoGen AI, and what they do is they provide generative AI tools to help you create winning bids if you're pitching to governments. So what they've
right.
done is they've taken lots of data on proposals that seem to win, proposals that don't seem to win, and they fine-tuned these large language models, so it picks up on language for winning bids. And they've also fine-tuned it for companies as well. So if you're putting a proposal together, you want to have your own content blurb and boilerplate and things like that. So it pulls out company content, it knows what seems to be winning bids, and it helps you put that together. And amazing, amazing tools. And you can just see those types of tools, how many different examples will there be out there. They've also done some good work for fact checking as well. So they have a human over the loop. You come up with a bid, it will highlight some text saying, this is some facts, please check it, that sort of thing. So it has a very good interface between the machine and humans. So it's a human in the loop sort of interface. But I look at the use cases. You've got writing, you've got marketing and sales, You've got imagery, you've got video, you've got fashion design, you've got coding, and so many different use cases that are going on there. So the opportunities are vast in terms of the number of startup companies, but the problem with any gold rush is there will be a lot of losers there.
Yeah.
So there's going to be 1,000 startups and probably 100 of them make it. So there's what it is very much a land grab. If you're doing software for generative AI software for bid proposals for companies, you've got to get big quick and become the category winner. So that's why there's such a race. Um, the other side of the sort of the investment thesis is who are the picks and shovels, the necessary tools for generative AI? And unfortunately, it will go back to Google, Microsoft, Amazon, all of the American big tech are going
Hmm.
to have foundational models, APIs that everyone's going to use basically at the end of the day. So they're going to become the big picks and shovels of this sort of gold rush.
Yeah, they already have all of the data. They already have a lot of this stuff on the way. Yeah, right. Well,
Yeah.
so thanks heaps for. I mean, again, I feel like we've just kind of broached a couple of topics today. We could go on for a very, very long time. We're going to have to get you back on to kind of maybe go dive deep into some of these areas. Perhaps
Mhm.
for people who are skeptical, for listeners who might be thinking, well, yeah, I'm in the investment side. I'm just looking for the next big thing. Or people who are
Yeah.
very skeptical about AI, or people who are hoping too much for AI. Um,
Yeah.
any kind of last words you might have about what we should be expecting over the next couple of years in particular? What should we expect to materialize? What should we perhaps not expect to materialize for a few decades more, if at all?
Yeah. From an investment thesis, there will be obviously the gold rush on generative AI. If you're looking at generative AI investments, be very careful about the question of defensibility and moats. So if you're investing in a company for generative AI, what is unique about it? Does it have unique data? Does it have unique algorithms? Does it have enough capital to do a land grab for customer acquisition? So generative AI, there's going to be a lot of losers and a few big winners there. If we look at other areas of sort of AI, a lot of money is going to go into the sort of the AI moonshots, biology, biotech to solve problems of human therapeutics and things like that. That will take longer, but the rewards will be even bigger than we think. So there has to be
Yep.
caution around that. There's a lot of talk about quantum computing. I personally have seen there's a lot of investment going into it. That's just going to take longer and more complex than people believe. There's still a lot of engineering challenges to quantum computing. But when it is solved, the breakthroughs will be absolutely huge there. But a lot of money is going to be lost along the way there. So, those are some of the things. But overall, I'm optimistic that we will see a lot of progress in AI around healthcare, around education, and other areas that really can um, have benefit around the world.
Sounds great. Optimist.
Hmm,
Simon, thank you so much
optimist, yeah.
for co-hosting today. Where can people find you on the internet?
Yes. So, good question. I run a boutique AI management consultancy called bestpractice.ai. So, look for bestpractice.ai or find me on LinkedIn, Simon Greenman. Drop me a note, but be happy to chat with you about investments or with AI, and also how AI can help you in your company and organization.
Good on you, Simon. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much. Pleasure.
Thanks again for joining us today. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Off Chain. We love bringing you great guests like Simon. So please like, subscribe, and even better yet, share this episode, the whole episode, clips of the bit that you enjoyed or found most profound or insightful. And please join us again next week for another episode of Off Chain. Catch you there.